The day that changed everything. It was a quiet morning. The kind of morning where the world seems to hum softly, like it's trying to tell you a secret. I remember staring out the window, watching the sunlight filter through the trees when the phone rang. It was the kind of call that splits your life in two, the before and the after. My doctor's voice trembled slightly as he told me I needed to come in. "We found something. It's serious." That was the moment everything froze. Time, thoughts, breath, all suspended in that one instant. It wasn't just about bad news. It was the first time I truly came face to face with the possibility of death. Not as a concept. Not as a philosophical discussion. But as a presence standing quietly in the room beside me, patient, watching one. The illusion of immortality. For most of our lives, death is like a background noise. We know it's there, but we don't really listen. We scroll past obituaries, we avoid funerals if we can, and we joke about getting old like it's some distant land we might never reach. We operate under a powerful illusion that we have time. Plenty of it. I was no different. I planned for retirement, talked about someday trips, and treated time as an endless supply. I buried myself in work, distractions, social media, achievements, all ways of staying busy enough to avoid looking at the truth that waits quietly for all of us. But that phone call shattered the illusion. Suddenly, all the things that once felt important, money, success, arguments, appearances, seemed absurdly irrelevant. I wasn't thinking about my next paycheck. I was wondering if I'd get to see another birthday. And for the first time in my life, I realized how afraid I truly was. Not just of pain or loss, but of ceasing to exist. Of being forgotten. Of being nothing. 2. What death teaches you when you really listen. In the days that followed, I found myself in a strange space. Caught between fear and reflection. I was scared, yes, but I was also awake in a way I had never been before. Death, once a blurry thought in the distance, had pulled up a chair beside me. And strangely, it wasn't screaming. It wasn't cruel. It was silent. Calm. Almost peaceful. I started paying attention, not just to the world outside but to the one inside me. I remembered how I used to laugh as a child, how I used to watch the stars and wonder, how I used to ask, what happens when we die? Not with fear but with curiosity. And in that vulnerable, shaken version of myself, I began to hear something deeper. Death wasn't the enemy. My fear was. Death was just a part of the story, not the villain but the final chapter. The fear I carried was a creation of my mind, constantly fed by a culture that avoids mortality at all costs. Movies, news, social media, they either glamorize death or hide it completely. No one teaches us how to face it with peace. But what if we did? 3. The lie we're all told. We're taught to chase life like it's a race. To achieve, to accumulate, to climb ladders, to win. But win what? You can't win at life. There's no trophy at the end. There's only the question. Did you truly live while you were here? The lie we're sold is that if we can just do enough, buy enough, be impressive enough, then somehow we'll be safe. From pain. From aging. From loss. From death. But that's not how it works. And somewhere deep down we all know it. I started seeing this lie everywhere. In the way people avoid elderly relatives. In how we change the subject when someone says they're terminal. In the way we label grief as something to get over. We're terrified of death because we've never made peace with it. We don't talk to it. We don't ask it questions. We just run. But running doesn't make it go away. It just makes us miss life while we're trying not to die. 4. A quiet realization. One evening, I sat alone on a park bench as the sun began to set. I watched as an old couple walked slowly by, hand in hand. A child nearby chased a butterfly, laughing without a care in the world. The sky turned golden, then pink, then purple. And it hit me, this is life. Not the Instagram highlight reels, not the awards, not the plants. These quiet, beautiful, unnoticed moments. I realized I had spent so long fearing the end that I forgot to notice the beauty in the middle. What if death is just a reminder? A whisper that says, don't waste this. It's precious. 5. The start of a new relationship. That night something changed in me. I stopped fighting death like it was my enemy. I stopped pretending it wouldn't come. Instead, I began a new relationship with it. One built not on terror but on respect. Death, I realized, gives life its meaning. It's the very thing that makes a sunrise so special. The reason a kiss feels electric. The reason every breath matters. If we lived forever, nothing would feel urgent. Nothing would be sacred. It's death that teaches us how to live well. 6. Looking ahead with new eyes. I don't know how much time I have left. None of us do. But I do know this. I am no longer afraid in the way I used to be. The fear doesn't grip my chest. The thought of dying doesn't steal my sleep. Because now I understand, death is not the opposite of life. It's a part of it. And by embracing that, I found a strange kind of freedom. A quiet joy in the present moment. A deep love for the people around me. A renewed sense of purpose. This journey didn't begin with peace. It began with terror. But sometimes, it takes standing at the edge of everything to finally see what truly matters. And that was just the beginning. If death could speak, what would it say? If death could speak, I wonder what its voice would sound like. Would it whisper like wind through trees? Would it speak in riddles like an old sage? Or would it just sit in silence, watching, waiting, offering only presence? After the shock of my diagnosis wore off, I found myself doing something I never expected. I started talking to death. Not out loud and not in some dark or dramatic way. But in my quiet moments, in the shower, on long walks, at night staring at the ceiling, I imagined it sitting beside me not as a monster but as something more neutral, maybe even wise. I asked it questions. I tried to listen. And slowly I began to realize something powerful. Death had something to teach me the moment you stop running. Our natural instinct is to run from death. We delay the conversation. We sugarcoat it for our children. We make it a taboo topic. But when you stop running, when you turn around and face it, it loses the power it once had. Facing death was like turning the lights on in a dark room. At first, I was terrified of what I'd see. But once my eyes adjusted, I noticed something surprising. Death wasn't there to hurt me, it was there to show me something. It revealed how much I had been avoiding life. How many I love yous I hadn't said. How many moments I rushed through, faces I barely looked at, experiences I postponed for later. And the most painful realization? That later isn't promised to anyone. Lessons from the edge. I started reading stories of people who had near-death experiences, people who were clinically dead for a short time and came back. Their stories were different, yet oddly similar. None of them talked about regretting not working more hours or buying better cars. They didn't mourn their follower count or their missed promotions. What they remembered was love, connection, the simple, sacred moments, the warmth of a mother's hand, the sound of laughter echoing in a kitchen, the last glance at a sky filled with stars. And many of them said something that struck me: I wasn't afraid. When they came close to death, the fear didn't show up the way they expected. Instead, what they felt was peace, light, even love. These stories weren't scientific proofs, but they felt like truths, spoken from a place deeper than intellect, from the heart, from the soul. Reframing the narrative. In most cultures, death is portrayed as a thief, a destroyer, an ending. But not all of them. In some indigenous and spiritual traditions, death is a guide, a crossing from one form to another, not the erasure of existence but a transformation. The problem isn't death itself. It's the story we've been told about it. We live in a culture obsessed with youth, with permanence, with control. We inject ourselves with chemicals to avoid looking old. We keep our dying out of sight. We create digital versions of ourselves to seem immortal. But the truth is, everything we love will change. Everything we are will pass. That's not a tragedy, it's the rhythm of life. When I reframed death as a transition instead of a termination, everything softened. I began to see myself as part of a larger story, one I might never fully understand but one I could trust. Grief is a form of love. During this time, I also revisited the losses in my own life. My grandfather, an old friend, a beloved pet. I remembered the grief, the ache, the nights I cried into my pillow. And for the first time, I saw that grief wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of deep love. You don't grieve what doesn't matter. You grieve because you loved. You grieve because you remember. And in that pain is proof that something beautiful existed, even if only for a while. This helped me rethink my own death. If people cried for me, it wouldn't be a tragedy, it would be a testament. It would mean I had loved and been loved. What more can any of us ask for? The gift of impermanence. There's a Japanese concept called wabi-sabi. It's about finding beauty in imperfection and impermanence. A cracked teacup, a withered flower, a fading sunset. Things that don't last but somehow mean more because they don't. This changed how I saw myself. My aging body, my scars, my wrinkles, signs of life lived, of stories carried in skin. My time on this earth, however long, was a wabi-sabi moment. Fragile, temporary, beautiful. I stopped asking for forever. I started asking for depth, for presence, for truth. Even in the smallest things, like how the wind feels on my face or how tea tastes on a cold morning. Death taught me that the most precious moments are the ones that don't last. What I would tell my younger self. If I could go back and talk to my younger self, the one who avoided cemeteries, who couldn't say the word funeral, who feared growing old, I would say this. Death isn't here to steal from you. It's here to wake you up. It's not a curse. It's the clearest reminder of what really matters. Don't run from it. Let it guide you to live more honestly, love more deeply, and forgive more quickly. Because here's the truth most people don't realize until it's too late. When you stop fearing death, you finally start living. Closing reflection. I no longer see death as a black void waiting to swallow me. I see it as a mirror, one that reflects the deepest parts of who I am and who I want to be. It strips away all the noise, all the ego, all the pretending. It leaves only what's real. The journey is far from over. But each day I spend in this new relationship with death, I find myself more at peace, more grateful, more alive. And to think, it all began the day I stopped running. The greatest prison is fear, and I walked out of it. We often think of freedom as something external, the ability to go where we want, say what we want, do what we want. But there's a deeper kind of freedom, one that most people never touch in their lifetime. The freedom from fear. Especially the fear of death. For most of my life, that fear was like a shadow behind me. No matter how brightly I smiled, how busy I kept myself, or how loud the world got, the fear was always there, quiet, subtle, but powerful. I didn't realize it, but every decision I made, every anxiety I carried, and every future I tried to control was rooted in that invisible chain. But now, after facing it head-on, after sitting in its presence, asking it questions, listening without flinching, something extraordinary happened. The fear began to dissolve. And with it, I discovered a kind of lightness I never knew was possible. How fear shapes our lives without us knowing. Fear is sneaky. It hides in plain sight. It disguises itself as ambition, control, perfectionism, and even love. But underneath so much of what we do is the fear that one day it will all end, and we won't be ready. We chase success not just to achieve but to matter. We stay busy to distract ourselves. We try to look young, stay relevant, buy more, build more, all because we're terrified of becoming irrelevant, aging, vanishing. Fear shapes how we love too. It makes us cling, control, overprotect. It tells us not to be vulnerable because losing someone will hurt. It tells us not to take risks because failure will feel like dying. It keeps us small, safe, but never fully alive. I didn't realize how many of my choices were based not on joy or truth, but on fear of the end. What happens when you let go? Letting go of the fear of death doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean being reckless or morbid. It means finally being honest. It means recognizing the truth that we all live with an expiration date, and deciding to stop pretending otherwise. And once I did that, something shifted. Life no longer felt like a desperate sprint. Felt like a gift. A fleeting, sacred, astonishing gift. Every moment suddenly had weight. Not the weight of pressure but the weight of meaning. A quiet walk became a meditation. A hug became a ceremony. A conversation became a chance to be fully present. Even mundane things, like folding laundry or washing dishes, started to feel like moments to be here now. Because this might be the last time I do it, and that makes it beautiful. The power of acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean liking everything that happens. It means making peace with what is. When I accepted death, not as a possibility but as an eventuality, I found myself becoming softer, more open, more human. I didn't need to pretend to be strong all the time. I didn't need to chase a legacy. I didn't need to prove anything. Because I knew deeply and fully that my time here is temporary, and that's okay. Instead of trying to control life, I began to cooperate with it. Instead of clinging, I learned to release. Instead of resisting change, I started welcoming it. Death, I realized, was never the enemy. Resistance was. Denial was. And once I dropped those things, a strange kind of peace flooded in, living with intention, not just habit. Most people live on autopilot. Wake up, scroll, work, complain, sleep, repeat. We go through routines not because they serve us but because we're asleep, numbed by comfort, distraction, or fear. But when you face death, really face it, you wake up. You start to question everything. Why am I doing this? Who am I really? What would I regret not doing if I died tomorrow? What kind of relationships am I creating? What parts of me are still unlived? Suddenly, the little things start to matter more and the fake things start to fall away. You stop wasting time trying to impress people who don't care. You stop saying yes when you mean no. You start living from the inside out. Death is the greatest teacher. If you let it, death will teach you things no book, guru, or success ever could. It teaches you urgency, not the frantic kind but the purposeful kind. It teaches you presence, the kind that makes you truly see the people in front of you. And it teaches you love, not the romantic fantasy but the deep, soul-level kind that wants nothing more than to cherish another person in this very moment. Death taught me to hold hands longer, to apologize faster, to laugh louder, to speak my truth even when my voice shakes, to stop waiting for the right time, because this is it. Right now. This is life freedom found at the edge. You can't know what freedom tastes like until you've lived with the weight of fear on your chest, and then let it go. The moment I stopped fearing death, I felt liberated. Not just spiritually but practically. My decisions became simpler. My relationships deeper. My days more intentional. I stopped postponing joy. I stopped overthinking everything. I started waking up excited again, not because I knew what the day would bring but because I didn't. Death reminds me that I don't have forever. And far from depressing me, that realization sets me on fire. It reminds me to say what I need to say, go where my heart leads, forgive what's behind me, and embrace whatever time I've been given. Final reflection, the invitation of mortality. The irony of death is that it's not here to end us, it's here to invite us. To invite us to live more fully, love more deeply, and let go more freely. We spend so much energy resisting it, fearing it, pretending we'll outrun it. But in doing so, we miss the very thing death is trying to offer us: clarity, purpose, and freedom. I used to see death as a threat. Now I see it as a reminder, a friend who walks beside me gently whispering, "Don't forget. This is your one wild, precious moment. Don't sleep through it." And ever since I started listening, I haven't. The possibility that changed everything. What if death isn't the end? What if we've been looking at it all wrong, not as a brick wall but as a door? Not a collapse into nothingness, but a continuation into something else? This single question shook my entire belief system. Not because I suddenly wanted to believe in fairy tales or avoid reality, but because, in the stillness that followed my deepest fears, something within me began to remember rather than learn. A deep, ancient knowing stirred. One that whispered, "You've been here before." In this part of my journey, I didn't just make peace with death, I started to understand it. Not intellectually but spiritually. I began to realize that the end of the body may not be the end of the soul. And that realization didn't just calm my fear. It lit a fire of peace I had never known before. The limits of physical reality. Science has given us incredible insight into the body, the brain, and even consciousness. But as much as we know, there's still so much we don't understand. What is awareness? Where does it come from? And what happens when the body shuts down? I used to think consciousness was just brain activity, that once the neurons stopped firing, I would disappear. But then I came across stories, too many to ignore, of people who had clinically died and returned with vivid, coherent memories of things they couldn't have possibly known, conversations in other rooms, visions of deceased loved ones, a feeling of floating above their bodies, and a presence of something far beyond words. These weren't just fantasies. Many of these accounts were documented by doctors and researchers, scientists who had no agenda but couldn't deny what they witnessed. It made me wonder, if our bodies are radios, maybe our consciousness is the signal. When the radio breaks, the signal doesn't disappear, it just finds another way to be heard. The soul's gentle whisper. Even before I read these accounts, I had felt something inside me, a quiet, persistent sense that there was more to me than this skin, this name, this moment in time. It wasn't religious dogma. It was intuition. The soul's whisper. That whisper grew louder when I faced death. In the silence it said, "You are not this body. You are not this fear. You are not even this life." At first I resisted. It sounded too abstract, too comforting. But the more I sat with it, in meditation, in reflection, in grief and awe, the more it made sense. There was a part of me that had always been watching, always aware, untouched by time or pain. And that part, call it soul, spirit, awareness, didn't seem afraid at all. In fact, it felt ancient, eternal. Death as a return, not a loss. Imagine falling asleep and waking up from a dream so real that you forgot it wasn't your true self. What if life is that dream and death is the waking? This doesn't mean life is meaningless. Quite the opposite. If death is a return, then this life is a sacred journey, a chapter in a much larger story. Every joy, every sorrow, every moment of connection is deeply meaningful because it shapes who we become on a soul level. I began to see death not as something taken away from me, but as a return to something greater. A homecoming. A reconnection with everything and everyone I've ever loved, and perhaps, everyone I've ever been. And strangely, this didn't make me float off into fantasy. It made me more grounded in this life. It made every experience here more profound, more urgent, more precious. Messages from those who've gone before. After opening myself up to the idea that death isn't the end, I started to feel more connected to the people I had lost. Not just in memory but in presence. Sometimes in dreams, sometimes in moments of unexpected peace, sometimes in a strange inner knowing that they were still with me, just in a different form. Many cultures have always believed this, that our ancestors walk with us, that love transcends death, that the dead are not gone, only changed. I used to think those beliefs were poetic but primitive. Now I think they were wise. Perhaps we've become too logical, too skeptical, too afraid to open the door to mystery. But once I truly allowed the possibility that my loved ones were not lost but simply transformed, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood. Reunion, the spiritual shift. Facing death made me more spiritual, not in a religious sense but in a deeply human one. I started seeing life as a soul journey. I started asking different questions. What am I really here to learn? How can I love better? What does my soul want to experience before I go? I stopped worrying so much about success and started focusing on connection, to others, to the earth, to my own inner wisdom. This shift didn't make me less productive. It made me more aligned, more present, more compassionate. I became less afraid to be vulnerable, to speak truth, to say, I don't know, and to cry at beauty without shame. When you understand that this life is not the whole story, you start living it as if it matters, because it does. It matters so much more. A new kind of hope. The fear of death once left me hopeless. But now I carry a different kind of hope, one that isn't rooted in denial but in trust. A trust that life doesn't end at the grave, that love doesn't stop at the funeral, that consciousness doesn't flicker out, but continues in ways we can't yet comprehend. This hope doesn't blind me to suffering, but it helps me move through suffering with grace. It helps me be with people who are dying, not as someone terrified, but as someone honored to walk them to the edge of the next chapter. It helps me face my own mortality with eyes wide open, heart wide open, soul wide awake. Final reflection. A soul remembering its truth. We are not our fears. We are not our flesh. We are not even our thoughts. We are eternal awareness, experiencing a moment in time through a human lens. When I first feared death, I thought it would steal everything from me. But now I see the truth. Death takes nothing that is real. It only removes what is temporary. What is real, our love, our growth, our soul, is untouched. So I walk forward now, not in dread but in wonder. Not hoping to avoid death but hoping to live fully before I return home. When you stop fearing death, you start living differently. There's a quiet revolution that happens inside you when you no longer fear death. The world looks different. Not just because the darkness has lifted, but because you're no longer spending your energy trying to escape it. You stop running. You stop hiding. And in that stillness, you learn how to live in a way that most people never do. When I stopped being afraid to die, I also stopped being afraid to live. To live fully, boldly, honestly. Not half alive, not sleepwalking, not behind walls of fear, but awake, open, unapologetically present. It didn't mean I became reckless or careless. It meant I finally understood how sacred this temporary life is. And I decided I wouldn't waste a second more of it. The collapse of the false self. Most of us carry around a version of ourselves designed to survive in the world. The one that conforms, performs, pleases, and protects. It's a mask built by fear. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of not being enough, and most of all, fear of the end. But when you stop fearing death, that mask begins to fall apart. Why keep pretending? Why chase validation from people who won't even remember you when you're gone? Why live someone else's version of success when your time is so short? Death strips away illusion. It reveals the false self, the identity built from fear, and gives you the chance to reclaim your true self, the soul underneath. That's what happened to me. I stopped needing to be impressive. I started needing to be real. I wasn't interested in applause anymore. I was interested in meaning, in peace, in joy. And not the kind that comes from achievement, the kind that comes from alignment. Reclaiming the present moment. Most people don't live in the now. They live in the what if. What if I lose my job? What if I get sick? What if I die? But those what ifs are built on fear, and fear lives in the future, a place that doesn't exist yet. When you stop fearing the future, the present becomes your home again. And it's a beautiful home. One filled with light, breath, sound, and presence. I used to rush through everything, meals, conversations, even rest, as if something more important was always waiting. But now I savor. I taste. I pause. I listen. I breathe. Because I know, this moment might never come again. That awareness doesn't depress me. It liberates me. It reminds me that life doesn't need to be dramatic or extraordinary to be profound. Folding a towel, drinking tea, hearing a child laugh. These moments are the miracle. I just wasn't awake enough to see it before. Love without holding back. Fear makes us withhold love. We don't say how we feel. We guard our hearts. We wait for guarantees. But when you stop fearing death and the losses that come with it, you stop hesitating. You love more freely, more fiercely, more fearlessly. You say, I love you when you feel it. You forgive faster. You hold hands longer. You express instead of suppress. Why? Because you know that everything you love will eventually end, and that's exactly why you must love it now. Not later. Not tomorrow. Not when the timing feels perfect. No. I began to write letters to people I loved. I said things I had never said out loud. I sat with my parents and asked about their childhoods. I cried with friends without shame. I opened my heart without expecting anything in return. And you know what happened? My life deepened. My relationships bloomed. My soul felt seen. Because I stopped waiting for more time, I used the time I had. Freedom from the fear of failure. Here's a truth most people won't admit. We don't chase goals just for success. We chase them to avoid feeling like we've wasted our lives. Failure feels like dying in slow motion. But when you're no longer afraid of death, you're not afraid of failing either. Because you realize, failing doesn't make your life meaningless. Avoiding your calling does. I stopped being afraid to try things that scared me, writing from my heart, speaking truthfully, starting over. Because I wasn't afraid of failing anymore. I was only afraid of not living fully. When you take death off the table as something to be feared, you also take off the pressure. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to impress anyone. You just need to be true to yourself. The beauty of letting go. Letting go used to terrify me, whether it was letting go of people, plans, or identities. I clung tightly to what I thought I needed because I believed I could control the story. But death teaches you that control is an illusion. It shows you the beauty in surrender. In allowing life to unfold instead of forcing it. I learned to let go of resentment. Of old stories I told myself. Of timelines I thought I needed to follow. I let go of the pressure to be constantly productive, and instead started being presently alive. This letting go wasn't giving up. It was growing up. It was trusting life. Trusting that if I'm still here, breathing, there's something sacred about this very moment. Something worth showing up for. Living in the light of death. When you walk through the valley of death, not just in body but in mind and spirit, you come out the other side with clear eyes. You see what matters. You see who you are. You see that fear was never protecting you, it was preventing you. Now, I live every day not as if it's guaranteed, but as if it's a miracle. Because it is. I watch the sunset like it's my last. I say thank you to my body for carrying me. I laugh louder, cry quicker, and rest more deeply. I choose presence over perfection. And I walk with the awareness that all of this, is a gift. Final reflection. The quiet joy of being alive. This part of the journey isn't about death anymore. It's about life. Real, raw, radiant life. The kind that isn't measured by years but by moments of truth. The kind that doesn't need a legacy, just a sense of inner peace. I used to think that avoiding death would keep me safe. But it only kept me small. Now I understand that looking death in the eye, and smiling, is the most courageous, freeing, and loving act I could ever commit. I don't fear dying. I fear not living before I do. And now, I live as if dying doesn't scare me because it doesn't. Death is not the end, it's the completion of a circle. There's a quiet moment that comes when you've made peace with death. A moment that feels like coming home. Not in the sense of giving up or fading away, but in the way a traveler returns after a long, meaningful journey. A soul having lived fully, finally ready to rest. This is the final part of my story, not a goodbye but a soft landing. Because the fear of death didn't just vanish for me in a single moment. It dissolved slowly like mist in morning sunlight, revealing not darkness behind it, but something surprisingly beautiful, completion. The realization that death is not the enemy of life, but its final teacher. Its closing note. Its return to wholeness. What legacy really means. When we talk about death, we often shift the conversation to legacy. What will we leave behind? Will we be remembered? Will we matter? I used to think legacy meant doing something big. Writing a book, building a business, leaving a mark. But now I see legacy differently. It's not about what you do. It's about how you lived, how you loved, how you made people feel in your presence. Your legacy might not be your resume. It might be your kindness. The way you made someone feel seen when they were invisible to everyone else. The time you forgave when you didn't have to. The way you smiled at strangers. The meals you cooked with love. The silence you shared without judgment. These are the imprints that last long after our bodies are gone. Because people don't remember what you did, they remember how you made them feel. And if that's true, then your life is already leaving ripples you'll never see. The soul's purpose revealed. As I walked further along this journey, out of fear and into understanding, I began asking one of life's most haunting questions. Why am I here? What is the point of all this? And then it hit me, maybe the point isn't something to achieve. Maybe it's something to embody. Maybe I'm here to experience the full spectrum of being human, joy, sorrow, laughter, grief. Learn how to love more deeply and more truly. Grow through the difficult and soften through the beautiful. And then, to let go. To return to whatever comes next with a heart that says, I didn't waste it. The soul's purpose, I've come to believe, isn't grand or glamorous. It's real. It's your unique journey of becoming. And death is not the failure of that journey, it's the fulfillment of it. Making peace with goodbyes. Saying goodbye used to tear me apart. Whether it was letting go of a loved one, an old version of myself, or a chapter in life, I clung tightly, fearing the finality. But now I understand, every goodbye carries within it the seeds of gratitude. We only grieve what was beautiful. We only cry for what touched us. We only say goodbye because something mattered. And so, I no longer fear goodbyes. I let them come. I honor them. I cry if I need to. I laugh at the memories. I hold space for the tenderness. And then I allow the moment to pass, just like a sunset fading with grace. Because everything in life is a cycle. And every ending is simply a return, not into emptiness but into wholeness. Death as a teacher of priorities. Nothing teaches you what truly matters like the awareness of your own death. It clears away the noise. It silences the superficial. It brings into focus the only things worth holding on to. I no longer care how many followers I have. I care about how deeply I listen. I no longer strive to be liked by everyone. I strive to live with integrity. I no longer chase success for the sake of security. I chase truth and simplicity and peace. I spend more time with nature. I call the people I love. I look strangers in the eyes and smile. Because this is what matters. Not later. Not when the kids are grown or the bank account is full. No. Death reminds me, there is no someday. There is only today. Returning to the mystery. The older I get, and the more I surrender to the reality of death, the less I feel the need to know everything. I've made peace with the mystery. Where do we go after we die? I don't know. And I don't need to. What I do know is this: when I've touched death, in thought, in grief, in fear, it hasn't felt like punishment. It's felt like a sacred shift, a quiet transition, a remembering. Maybe the mystery isn't meant to be solved. Maybe it's meant to be trusted. And when I sit with that trust, I feel something vast and ancient and kind holding me, something that says, you are part of something far greater than you know. And when the time comes, you'll return to it. Not in pain. Not in fear. But in peace. A gentle return home. If death is the closing of life's circle, then I am no longer afraid to step into that final arc. Not today. Not tomorrow. But when it comes, I will greet it with open hands. I will not fight the tide. I will not beg for one more breath. I will thank life for all it gave me, the joys, the wounds, the laughter, the tears, and I will return home. Because home is not a place. It's not a heaven with golden gates or a void of nothingness. Home is the eternal, the source, the light, the love that created me in the first place. And I believe it's still there, waiting patiently, ready to welcome me back. I lived. I tried. I stumbled. I grew. I gave what I could. I loved as best I knew how. And when the time comes to go, I will go not afraid but full. Final words, from fear to freedom. This story began with fear, raw, paralyzing fear. But it ends here in freedom. The kind of freedom that can't be bought, earned, or taught. Only lived. Only discovered. I no longer fear death because I've walked with it. And in walking with it, I found my life. So to you who may still fear it, I offer this. Death is not the enemy. It is not the end. It is the return. And the way to prepare for death is simply to live without regrets. Love boldly. Speak truthfully. Forgive quickly. Breathe deeply. And when the time comes, go softly. Because you will not be ending. You will only be going home.